Every day, someone's ditching Claude Code for Codex, or vice versa. Here's why you should be using both. So, for the best part of this year, I have been using both Claude Code and Codex together. And the reason for that is quite simple. So, ultimately, they're complementary in a way where Claude Code, Opus, or also less so, but Fable's much more expensive, right? They just overlook things. And I have a separate video on the rush bias. Essentially, it used to be part of the system prompt. I think that has become better, but still, ultimately, often it will miss something. So far, Claude Code is just not a good architect of a code base, of features, etc. because it overlooks edge cases, sometimes not so much edge case as like anything that's not the golden path, really, right? And just doesn't think about these things unless you specifically prompt it. And Codex or GPT models are very much the opposite. They take a very diligent approach, but often over-engineer, certain things, and it adds hardening for features that, with your 3-person SaaS, you'll never need, and it leads to more complex code, right? It's correct, but it says, let's add this edge case handling here. And if you had 1 million users, you would see this once a month, this thing break. But with your 3 users, it's very unlikely you'll ever hit this, but it leads to a more complex code base because it needs to tackle it, like it has to do it. Both of them are actually quite complementary because they are just miscalibrated, but in opposite directions, right? So one is trying to rush and be fast and be less diligent, and the other is going slow, it's being very diligent to the point of being too diligent, almost like a 6-year-old senior full stack developer that just like, actually forgot about this thing that I've seen once in 20 or 40 years that I've worked as a developer. And so I think what you have to do, or what, if you can afford it, obviously, right? And I'll go into that later if you only have to pick one. So when I would reach for Claude is brainstorming conversation, an interview. So usually we start a feature with an interview where I just have Claude grill me on edge cases, what the feature is supposed to accomplish, who the user is, blah, 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 blah. Interviewing to shape the feature, really. Or just to dump my brain. And then plans or RFCs, implementation and sub-agent orchestration, and then anything we're using, because we're also using the agent SDK to build products, it's good to do anything of that nature with Claude, because obviously they know their own models best, right? So it also has the skill to read documents and all that stuff. So usually these are the things I would use Claude for. And then here's what I will use Codex for, which is review, like architecture review, very small contained changes, looking at PR comments. And then what we said last time, so this is from an internal meeting, these notes is like with GPT 5.6, like reviewing code as well, but that can be quite expensive. Also reviewing the plan can be quite expensive. And so from a workflow perspective, it's interviewing with Claude, that in plan mode. So that will create a plan. And then once I have that plan, I will have Codex review the plan, surface blockers and things that have not been tackled by Claude. Then it goes back and forth like once or twice, or maybe sometimes like more than that. And then at some point Codex will say, hey, there's no remaining blockers. And then we move into implementation that will be done with Claude. And then Codex will review the implementation according to the plan, right? And so then when there is pull requests are being automatically reviewed by Claude, and then Codex will do the surgical small changes where I say, hey, look at all the pull request feedback and implement the legit stuff or resolve it if it's not according to the plan. So sometimes code review will do false positives that, or things are incorrect, but they're actually fine according to the plan. So then we are just resolving the comment. We're just closing it. And otherwise, Codex has enough context because it's like line, right? Like inline comments. So it has all the lines it needs in order to figure out, okay, this is the area of change. And then it has a comment from Claude, which is enough for it to do surgical kind of changes. So if you only do one sub, I would go for Codex, especially also because they give more resets. Usually I have the $100 subscription for Codex and I have the $200 subscription for Claude. And also with Fable, like I think just much more affordable to use GPT models. It is a bit harder to talk to, but that's mostly a convenience feature. If you are a developer, you're used to being very precise, and then Codex is really good for you. If you're non-technical, honestly, I probably would steer towards, so this is a recommendation for developers or people like me, like technical by background. If you don't have that, I would probably stick with Claude Code just because the like vibe coding is much easier. And maybe have heard this before where people say like, hey, Codex is for engineers and Claude Code is a toy. Like that isn't accurate, I'm not saying, but it is. The core truth is that for non-technicals, it will be much easier to use. Again, if you can afford both, I'll use them together. Again, as a summary, right? So interview and spec with Claude, architecture with Codex, implementation with Claude, verify versus plan with Codex, conversational iteration Claude, PR cleanup Codex. And then, ultimately you also have to do some review and catch some blind spots if they are there, especially again, making sure Claude has done all you asked it to do. You can do that manually or with the Chrome extension feature where you can use the Chrome extension to have AI review it. But ultimately, I always do like a visual, if it's a visual feature, just a visual pass and say like, okay, this looks fine. Because also sometimes there's design issues or it's technically there, but it looks like shit, right? So essentially you want to catch that. And then also any sort of blind spot around, like maybe you did make a mistake after all and like how the feature should work or something is over engineered. And often I will also just put pushback on Codex and these absurd fixes that make the code base twice as big, but then just don't really add any value. You usually as a developer are just not thinking about these things. So they are there and they are correct, but they're just unnecessary. Unless it breaks, it won't be an issue. But that's a judgment call at the end of the day. That isn't always true. Anyway, so what we're doing now, I have for Claude Code, I have a / command that's called codex-tool. So it's a skill essentially, but you can also use a / codex-tool. And then I give it instructions to use Codex for the review pieces. So then Claude Code just uses the CLI, which reduced a lot of the back and forth, but I only do that if it's quite a medium. Simple features is fine. If it's very complex, I do like to review what they're doing, like what Codex is saying so that I can push back. But with this flow, you can essentially have it run in a loop and keep, talking to each other. Again, trade-off, more autonomous, less control, right? This is really the battle we're trying to pick here. But again, I think maybe this was interesting, how I ship production code with these tools, because there's still enough people saying it doesn't work. It does, but you have to know how to do it. And obviously, I'm not shipping fucking rockets. It's software, has been solved before. So if you're doing something on the fringes, maybe not. Otherwise, it's hard to not make it work. Anyway, enough of a ramble. If any of this stuff sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.